Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we are going to be doing a video on the stain process from start to finish. Now I've done a video on this years ago, but I would say it is probably one of the most frequently asked processes that I get questions, DMs, emails about. A lot of people struggle with staining. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started on this piece that I have, and we're gonna do it start to finish. All right, so first things first, let's talk about what you're going to need as far as supplies go. So first thing is a sander. I'm gonna use my Mirka Deros 5.0 Orbital sander. Now, for this job, the Orbital sander is gonna do exactly what I needed to do. It is a workhorse of a sander and it's gonna remove that finish. Now, the sandpaper that I choose, and I say this all the time, all sandpapers are not created equal. This is one of my favorite. You can use this whether you have a Mirka, whether you have a DeWalt, whether you have a Bosch, it does not matter. This will fit. These are sanding screens and I love these because less dust. So this is what I'm gonna be using. I'm gonna start with 100 grit. We're gonna go to 120 and then we'll end at 150. Now, if you feel like you need it smoother, you can continue with 180, that being your last grit that you're gonna use for staining purposes. If you're sanding to paint, that's a whole nother thing, and we're not gonna talk about that today because we're concentrating on the stain. So we've got our sander and we've got our sandpaper to go ahead and get started. Now, I have a dust collection system, so I'm gonna go ahead and just show you really quick what that is. I've talked about it in many of my videos. It is the Festool CT Midi Hepa dust collector. It is quite the mouthful. So that's what I'm using. It keeps my dust very, very minimal, and you can hook up to a vac, and if you don't have any of that fancy stuff, you don't need it, but I suggest moving maybe closer to the outdoors so that you don't fill your room with a bunch of sanding dust. Let's go ahead and get started. So this is my Hepa dust collection system. As I said, it's the Festool CT Midi. I just have to show you guys something because you might think I'm crazy. Next to it, you can see my Urlix 5500 paint sprayer. And yes, literally feet from where I'm sanding, I am painting, and I am painting black. And I just want to show you guys, there is zero dust. So this thing is fabulous, excellent. I cannot recommend it more. No, they are not cheap. They are an investment. However, they're a great investment if you do this as much as someone like I do. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with the sanding process. I'm just showing you here, this is the Orbital and how easy these sandpaper discs go on. They literally just stick, no problem at all. So we're gonna go ahead and get started on sanding this. I am starting with my 100 grit sandpaper. I do know that this is a solid wood piece, so I'm not concerned about burn through. What is burn through? Burn through is when you do not have a solid wood piece and you're working with a wood veneer. It is real wood, but it's a very thin layer of real wood over a different type of wood, sometimes plywood, sometimes MDF, it just depends. In that case, you would start with a lighter grit. You would make sure that you weren't going to burn through, so you would start with maybe 120. I always go on the more conservative side when I am working with veneer. Again, this is solid wood, so I'm going to go ahead and start with my 100 grit. You can even start further down if you want to by using 80, or some people even use 60. I personally don't go down to that grit. I like to start at 100 and then go up from there. So we're just going to work on removing the finish here. It's coming off pretty easily because this is an older piece, and usually with the older pieces, their varnishes have come off over the years, so it actually makes it pretty quick to get the finish off. Now you will notice I'm not working on trying to get the entire finish off with one grit. That is something you do not want to do. If you push too hard or you work too fast to try to get that grit off, to try to get the finish off with one grit, what you end up with, you can get some swirl marks in there, you can get some depressions in there, and you don't want to do that. So that is why we step up in grit, is that we work on removing the finish with each grit. All right, so just want to show you what it looks like after our first pass with the 100 grit. And as you can see, I still have a lot more work to do. So we're going to go ahead and put the 120 paper on, and I'm also going to work on getting these edges off here. All right, so now we have our 120 on, and we're going to attempt to do the sides here with the Orbital. You can either use a surf prep, which it has more of a ability to work with the curved edges. We do have a slight curve here on the edge, but I'm going to go ahead and work with my Orbital. The other thing you can do is hand sand. So if you have to, you can see the finish is coming off fairly easy with this, but as you can see, I'm also doing circular motions when I'm working on that edge, and that is to alleviate me putting in a hard, rigid edge with my Orbital, because it will do that if you're not careful. So I'm just going to kind of work these edges here and see how much of the finish that I can get off with the Orbital. Okay, so you can see everything I was able to get off with the Orbital. I didn't want to get too close to the edge because it can go ahead and take that edge down because the Orbital is so powerful. So I want to show you a little trick in case you don't have a different type of sander. I used to do this all the time before I got my surf prep, and that is sanding by hand. So all I do is fold my sandpaper in half, and I go ahead and go to town. Now I am working with the most aggressive grit on this, which is 100, and I'm just going to work this a little bit at a time to try to get that finish off. It works. It's old-fashioned. There's no fancy tools, but it'll get the job done. Okay, so now we're ready to do our 150 and get the rest of this finish off. So the biggest piece of advice I can give you when you're getting ready to stain your piece is just make sure you're happy with the sanding job prior. That is usually the most important factor in this whole process. If your piece is not sanded appropriately, then it's not going to stain beautifully. So take your time, make sure you have plenty of sandpaper grits to work through. Like I said, I start with 100, 120, 150, and I'll go up to 180. Any finer than 180 starts to change the wood. Now, it won't close the pores. I've heard that term used so many times. But it can, sanding too fine can change how the stain imparts to the wood evenly. So if you get it too fine, it's harder for that stain to penetrate the wood. So we usually want to stop at about 180. So here I'm using 150. I'll test it after I'm done to see how smooth it is. If I feel like by hand it's smooth enough, then I won't go any finer. If I feel like it still kind of feels like it needs some more, then I'll move up to the 180. So I'm going to show you up close in just a minute, but we're all done. I'm going to stop at 150 because it is plenty smooth. If you feel the need, you can go up to 180. Just keep that in mind for any of your projects. Now, for this, it's a solid wood piece, so I started with 100. If I was concerned, I'm working with a veneer, it's thinner, and I want to make sure I don't burn through, then I would have gone ahead and started with my 120 grit, 150, and ended at 180. It's always good to err on the side of caution when working with veneers because they are wood, but they are extremely thin. And what's under a veneer is typically like a press board, an MDF, sometimes a different type of wood. And so you want to be really careful not to burn through. Once you burn through that original veneer, Unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do to fix that so that stain can not only adhere to it, but so that it won't show that mistake. All right, so let me show you guys up close. We're now ready for stain. What I'll do next is wipe this piece off just to get off any of that excess loose dust, and then we'll move into using our stain. So let me show you up close how good it looks. Now, one of the things before we do that though, I did want to mention was this edge here. If you saw me kind of moving my sander in short little bursts and kind of in funny little ways, what I was doing there is because I removed this with an Orbital, it can tend to make the wood less curve with its natural curve. So I didn't want any harsh edges or lines that sander can put in because it's flat. And so it can tend to flatten a rounded curve. So that's what you saw me doing, and that will help keep the shape of what we currently have. All ready for stain. It's beautiful wood. The client has chosen a dark stain, so we're gonna go with Varathane Kona, but as you can see, I was able to get all of that stain off of the edge and keeping the nice round edge, no problem at all. And then there is where I hit it with the sander, and unfortunately, that happens sometimes. I should have taken the top drawer out because I've had that happen before, but it's no big deal. I will just touch that up with some paint. Okay, so before I go apply my stain, I do take a microfiber cloth and I wipe it down just to make sure that I get any sanding dust or debris off of the piece, and it's all nice and clean and ready for my stain. As I mentioned, for today's video, we're going to be using Varathane Wood Stain in Kona. This is one of my favorite stains to use. Now, I do apply with a foam brush, and I do always tell you guys, not all foam brushes are created equal, so make sure you get a good one. I like to get these from my woodworking store, or Lowe's or Home Depot has a really good foam brush. You just want to make sure that it's a good quality so that the head doesn't go flying off, which I've had happen when you're applying your stain. So applying stain is pretty darn simple. The biggest rule that you want to follow is to go with the grain of the wood, not against it. So as you can see what I'm doing here, I'm just kind of making sure I work my edges to not have so much stain that it drips. Any drips on the top surface are fine because I'm going to go ahead and blend those in with my applicator, but I do tend to try and make sure that my applicator brush is a little bit on the drier side, especially on my edges, so that I'm not going to drip down my piece. So basically just go back and forth. You can do it just like this, where I'm kind of rubbing in the edge, making sure I get a good amount of product on, but not oversaturating it and worrying about when I go to wipe it back that I'm going to be slinging around a lot of product. So this stain says it is a 1 hour, 1 coat coverage. Now, what I will tell you is I typically do more than 1 coat. It all depends on the look you're trying to achieve, but I have not had super great look by doing just 1 coat. So what I'm probably going to be doing is my normal, which is about 2 coats, even sometimes 3, and that depends on the wood species you're working with. So again, it's one of those things that you just kind of have to figure out what look you're trying to achieve. When you're happy, you can stop. All right, now you can wipe back with a couple of different items. What I like to use are the box of white rags. There's the blue shop towels. You can use old t-shirts. You want to go from one end of your piece to the other, again, staying with the wood grain, not working against it. So what you choose to wipe off with is totally a personal preference. I like these because they're lint-free and I don't have to worry about anything getting stuck in my stain finish. So as you can see, I flip the rag quite a bit to make sure I have nice and fresh, clean side to get off all the stain. This is kind of the key or the important part of the stain application, to make sure that you get all the stain off and make sure that you're wiping with the grain and keeping it nice and clean. Okay, so we have our 1 coat on. With the Varathane oil-based stain, it does say it's a 1 coat and it's a 1 hour. Now, I typically do more than 1 coat unless I know somebody's looking for a very specific look. But this is our piece now, 1 coat. I will go ahead and do a 2nd coat because I'm looking to achieve a little bit richer, a little deeper of a color, and it will absolutely darken with my next coat. Typically with this product, I use 2 coats. It also depends on the wood species that you're working with. Certain grains of wood will accept stain better than others. For instance, oak. Oak is a very open, it's more of a wide open grain versus like cherry or maple, which is a tighter, harder wood, and it doesn't accept stain as easily. Pine is another one that accepts stain really, really well. It's very porous. So once you kind of get to know your different wood species that you're working with, you will know, oh, I need 1, I need 2, I need 3, whatever it is that you need. I know in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and do 1 more coat because I wanna achieve a little bit of a deeper look. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do, it's the end of the day today, so I'm gonna let this dry and then I'll come back probably before dinner time and I'll do the 2nd coat. I won't do that with you guys on camera because you guys get the idea. It's literally repeating the exact same process you saw me doing, just layering on that 2nd coat. Then tomorrow we'll come back and we'll clear. Here we are, 2 coats, and this is ready for top coat now. I did the 2 coats yesterday. Now, even though this is a 1-hour stain, I typically wait until the next day just to make sure everything's good and ready for the top coat. The other thing is the claim on this stain is it is a 1 coat stain. Now you can absolutely get away with 1 coat. I did 2 because I want to achieve more depth with the color. Super happy with the way it came out. So let's go ahead and get this ready for top coat. So now we're ready for the next step. Before I go ahead and get my spray gun loaded up, and I do spray all of my top coats 100%, makes such a huge difference for a flawless finish. But I understand if you can't do that and you don't have a sprayer. Here's a couple of things you're gonna need though, whether you spray it or you brush it. You're gonna need some steel wool. I use this quadruple 0, it is the finest. And what I use this for is I sand in between coats of my top coat. One of the reasons being is a lot of times products can go ahead and raise the grain. So you might feel after your first top coat is dry, it doesn't feel as smooth as you want it to. You can knock down that grain and or anything that has gotten into it just from the air and get that out. It won't etch or scratch your stained surface. Then you're gonna wanna use some of these tack cloths here. You can choose any brand you want, but you're gonna wanna tack off in between prior and in between each coat so that you make sure you have the cleanest surface for your top coat. Now, the top coat that we're gonna use today is the General Finishes High Performance Top Coat. This is my number 1. I use it all the time, and I wanna clear up something that is absolutely untrue, and that is you absolutely can top coat a water-based product over an oil-based product. Here's the thing though, you need to wait longer. So, oil-based product needs 72 hours to dry before applying your water-based top coat. I have done this hundreds of times. Let me tell you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. You can look it up, you can do your research, you can absolutely do it. There's no problem with it. It won't have any kind of a reaction as long as you wait that 72 hours for that oil-based product to really dry up. So, with that all being said, let's go ahead. I'm gonna load up my spray gun and we're gonna go ahead and get this finished. So even though I spray, I wanna show you guys, again, this is a foam brush. This one is from Lowe's and you can use that to apply your top coat or these, which are fantastic. I will link these in the show notes, but these are also the foam sponges that you can use to apply your top coat. Before I sprayed, that's what I used. All right, so before we go ahead and get started with our top coat, I've got a little tack cloth here. I'm gonna go ahead and just wipe lightly. You don't wanna put any pressure. Tack cloths do have oils in them, but you just want to wipe off any dust or debris that may have landed on your piece prior to top coating and getting it all perfectly ready. For today's video, I am spraying, like I said earlier. I'm using my Urlex 5500 and the top coat I'm choosing, which is my normal standard everyday use top coat, and that is General Finishes High Performance Top Coat in Satin. It is a water-based top coat and it can absolutely be used over an oil-based product. You just need to yield the dry times that the stain product says. In this case, it's a 1-hour stain. However, I have waited 24 hours to go ahead and apply. On a regular drying oil-based product, it's 72 hours before you apply your water-based top coat. I'm using my cardboard trick here so that I can get my edges and not spray all over my piece. All right, so this is where your steel wool is going to come in handy in between coats. What I normally do is feel the surface to see if the raised grain has any effect on how it feels. I also make sure that if there's anything that flew in. When you're working outside, you can get a little dust or debris. So I just swipe back and forth lightly with the wood grain, and I just kind of smooth it out. After I do this, I'll take my tack cloth again, wipe down the excess steel wool or anything that's left on there, and it'll be ready for my second coat of clear. Then you're going to take your tack cloth again. And here we're just repeating the exact same process. We're applying the second coat. Typically, what I like to do is apply 3 coats total. All right, you guys, that is it. We are at the end of the video. It's not as intimidating as you would have thought, right? Basically, it's just steps. It's just steps in the process that you have to follow. You know, what grits of sandpaper to use. That always is a confusing thing for a lot of people. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys today. There are many products out there on the market that are great for staining. Today's choice was just one of my #1 products that I really, really like to use. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for subscribing. If you aren't subscribed, make sure you go hit that subscription button as well as the post notification bell. That way you're notified when all of my latest videos are released. And I just put something new up on my page. It's called Buy Me a Coffee. I had never heard of it before, and a few of my subscribers had mentioned it. So it's there if you want to buy me a coffee. If you don't know what it's all about, go check out buymeacoffee.com. Thank you guys so much. If you have any positive comments or questions, please place them down below and I'll make sure that I get back to you. I love engaging with you guys, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye-bye.